Before I began working internationally, I had already experienced two very different professional worlds: the rule-bound environment of social insurance and the commercial use of language as an advertising copywriter. The international chapter that most strongly shaped my work today began in London in the early 2000s. There, I completed a postgraduate diploma in e-commerce and then an MSc in e-business and innovation at Birkbeck College, University of London. Alongside my studies, I was already working with real digital business models. For the British entrepreneur Lyle Cresswell, I supported Courier Exchange and Haulage Exchange, two B2B platforms serving the transport industry. Part of my work involves supporting their strategic market development in Germany and France. That experience introduced me early to a question that still shapes my work today. What has to come together for an offer that works in its home market to become relevant, understandable, and genuinely buyable in another market? From a technology perspective, Courier Exchange was a digital platform, but its commercial value did not come from the software alone. The platform had to connect supply and demand. It required trusted service providers paying member companies accreditation, reputation, clear rules, and reliable operational fulfillment. A British platform model did not automatically become transferable simply because the language, communication, or user interface was adapted. The more important question was whether the entire market and service logic would also work under different local conditions. At Truition, I then worked on B2B services in the e-commerce environment. The same distinction became clear again. Technical functionality and commercial value are not the same thing. Software can enable processes. It can simplify transactions and make digital propositions scalable. But the buyer is ultimately not interested in the technology as such. The buyer wants to know whether it will create a relevant and reliable effect within their organization. After London, I joined Credit Suisse in Zurich. In the EAM Exchange initiative, I was part of a cross-functional team working across marketing, business, product, and IT. The objective was to activate a significant number of external asset managers for a digital initiative. I was not the single accountable owner of the project. My position within the team did, however, allow me to observe the friction between the different functions at close range and to contribute to reducing it. IT could drive the digital strategy. Product could provide functionality. Marketing could develop information in campaigns. But business stakeholders still had to understand why the initiative mattered to their own work. My contribution was to support marketing in building awareness and buy-in across the business. That experience sharpened my understanding of a fundamental transfer gap. A technically credible solution does not become effective simply because it has been deployed. It becomes effective when technical contributions, business legitimacy, and operational use come together. My first systematic response to this friction was change management. I began to focus on how people understand change, support it, learn what it requires, and apply it sustainably. As a pro-sci practitioner and later as an advanced instructor for the ADKAR framework, I worked with leaders, sponsors, project teams, and change professionals. That phase was important because it showed me that a solution only creates economic value when people can integrate it into their real work. At the same time, I learned that communication and adoption do not solve every problem. You can build support for a change. You can develop knowledge and capability. You can strengthen leadership and participation. But when the underlying service promise is unclear, the roles do not fit together, or the operational delivery model does not hold, even strong change management cannot compensate for the structural gap indefinitely. Later, as managing director of TIBA Switzerland, I stood directly on the service provider side. In an anonymized assignment for a Switzerland-based industrial and engineering company, the objective was to strengthen project management in a technically demanding environment. The specialists were well qualified, methods and tools were already available. The real friction lay in the interaction between technical project leadership, program management, and other functions. The problem was explicitly not the absence of another tool. We therefore combined the placement and operational deployment of an experienced project leader with a series of supporting measures. I personally delivered ADKAR-based workshops to strengthen leadership, collaboration, method application, and behavioral change. From the provider perspective, I learned something decisive. A professional is not yet a service. A workshop is not yet a service. A method is not yet a service. These are contributions. What matters is whether those contributions work together in a way that produces the required effect for the customer. My mentor, Paul G. Huppertz, then led me towards a much more precise definition of service. He taught me not to define a service primarily through activities, technologies, or internal processes. A service becomes precise when three questions can be answered. Who is the authorized service consumer? What specific service object is involved? And what specific benefit is to be achieved at that object? This perspective changed how I looked at offers and markets. I began to distinguish much more clearly between the service itself and the contributions that make its delivery possible. The tool is a contribution. The platform is a contribution. The professional is a contribution. The implementation is a contribution. AI is also a contribution. But the buyer is not evaluating these contributions in isolation. The buyer is deciding whether the expected benefit is relevant, credible, integrable, and buyable under their own conditions. This also made the distinction between service provider and service buyer central to my work. The service provider defines and delivers a service promise. The service buyer decides whether that promise is relevant, credible, and buyable for their organization. A translation gap often exists between the two. The provider speaks from its own product, technology, or delivery logic. The buyer assesses the offer through the lens of market relevance, risk, budget, implementation, and use. That gap becomes wider in international market entry. An offer may be well established in the United Kingdom. It may have strong references, a functioning delivery model, and an experienced team. But that still does not prove that the relevant buyer in Switzerland will recognize the same value, accept the same evidence, and make the same buying decision. UK success is therefore an important starting point. It is not yet proof of Switzerland buyability. This is where the circle closes for me with my earlier London experience. At that time, I worked on making a British B2B platform model commercially relevant in Germany and France. Today, through Kostrzewa Accelerate Adoption, I help established UK B2B service and technology firms assess whether and how their proven offer can become viable in Switzerland. In this work, I deliberately distinguish between two decision makers. On one side is the UK executive who needs a robust market entry decision. That person must decide whether Switzerland justifies further commercial investment. On the other side is the future buyer in Switzerland. That person decides whether the specific service offering is relevant, credible, and buyable for their organization. These two perspectives must not be confused. The UK executive is not buying open-ended market development or general consulting from me. They are buying orientation and evidence for a specific investment decision. The Switzerland-based service buyer will not be persuaded by assertions alone. Their response has to be tested in the market. My work, therefore, does not begin with the recommendation to build a local organization, hire a country manager, or appoint a distribution partner. A local channel can accelerate a clear buying case. It cannot create buyability where buyability does not yet exist. More market data is not enough either. Data can inform without creating reliable commercial orientation. And more conversations do not automatically mean progress. What matters is whether those conversations are held with the right buyers and test a genuine commercial decision. The first step is therefore a clearly defined Switzerland market entry sprint. During the sprint, we test and calibrate the critical assumptions. Who is the relevant service buyer in Switzerland? Which problem is genuinely important enough to influence a buying decision? Which benefit needs to be described more precisely? Which parts of the UK offer can be transferred? What needs to be adapted? Which delivery boundaries need to become visible? Which references and forms of proof will be credible in the Switzerland context? Which accounts and stakeholders should be prioritized? And what evidence is required for the client to make a disciplined decision? The outcome is not a predetermined yes to Switzerland. It is a robust decision. Go, adapt, or no go. Go means there is sufficient commercial evidence to justify the next step. Adapt means there is a plausible market, but the offer needs to be adjusted in its positioning, service definition, proof, or delivery boundaries. No-go means the current investment hypothesis does not hold, and further local expenditure is not justified at this stage. A no-go is not a failure. It may be the most commercially valuable decision produced by the entire process. My role is therefore not that of a general market consultant, and it is not that of an outsourced sales executive without clear boundaries. I work as a Switzerland market entry advisor. I test, calibrate, prioritize, prepare, and guide the client towards a decision. In doing so, I combine my London experience with UK B2B platforms, my long-standing work in Switzerland-based organizations, my provider and change management experience, and my service-based perspective on buyers, value, and delivery. The first step is a fixed scope, time-limited Switzerland market entry sprint. First, test the buying case, then engage the market, evidence before investment.